This is brought to you by John Daniel and Partners LLP.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to today's webinar on the implications of the PBO Act and the new tax rules for NGOs in Kenya. My name is Frida Babu. I work at John Daniel and Partners LLP. We are a CPA firm based in Nairobi, Kilimani. I work in the business development department. We normally have these webinars every month, and the aim of the webinars is to empower SMEs in the field of tax and issues to do with budgeting. Yeah, and our today's speaker, his name is CPA Daniel Maina Chege. He's the managing partner at our firm, and he has over 20 years experience in the field of taxation, and he will guide us through the discussions that we are going to have. We also have someone from the accounting department, Beatrice. She'll be helping to handle any questions that we'll be having during the presentation. We kindly request you to mute your mics when the presentation is ongoing. If you have any question, you can use the chat box. It's on your left side. So you can raise any question, and Beatrice will be helping to tackle the question, and we will have a session of question and answer at the end of the presentation. And just to a reminder, the meeting is being recorded. Yes. Thank you so much for joining in. Dan, if you can hear me, welcome.
Thank you, Frida, and good morning to everybody. Welcome to the webinar. As Frida has mentioned, we are going to discuss about the implications of the Public Benefits Organizations Act. And there are also new tax exemption rules, and we'll be talking about them in the course of the webinar. We usually request that participants put in their comments, their questions in the chat box, which is good so that we can be able to address them, especially if you have something that's not clear. You can just put it in the chat so that my team can also be able to check on it and probably be able to respond during the webinar. So as mentioned, my name is Daniel Chege, and I'm grateful that I'm sharing with you this during this webinar, and it is a very interesting area, and hopefully you'll also be able to pick out something, and you can also contribute, because there could be areas that I'm sure you are familiar with, and probably some of us are already working in the NGO world. So I really welcome the views, the contributions, the questions that participants may have. So let's dive in. There is an act that we are calling Public Benefits Organizations Act, and that's what we'll cover. And the new tax exemption rules. They were issued in May this year. And basically they were trying to streamline those people who are seeking income tax exemptions, so that they don't pay tax on income. And most of these fall under the PBO Act, or what we call the not-for-profit organizations. So we'll be looking at the Act itself, the contents, and the compliance requirements for NGOs, the eligibility criteria. What does it mean to be a PBO? What are the implications? What has changed? And we believe we'll be able to learn together. A bit of background about the PBO Act. This is, the full name is Public Benefits Organizations Act, and it was enacted way back in 2013. And as you may be aware, when a new law has been enacted, enactment is signified by a session by the president, after it goes through the legislation process through parliament. Then the president signs, it moves from a bill to an act. But the operationalization, when it is to come into effect, it's usually determined in the same act. And in this act, it had stated that operationalization will be, with the date of operationalization is when it will be gazetted by the minister, and the minister in this case is the minister, the CS Treasury. But it stayed in abeyance for a very long time. That's about just over 1 year. Sorry, not 1 year, 10 years. And the reason for this, I don't know for sure, but I've heard many things. I've heard about politics. I've heard about some vested interests. That's just information by grapevine. I would want to hear, maybe there are participants who are aware why it took that long for it to be operationalized. Maybe the government was not comfortable. Maybe some important interested parties, and I'm putting the word important in quotes, were not very happy. I don't know. But maybe that's not the subject for today. It came into effect now, this time when it was, when the commencement date was gazetted, and that was on 14th May 2024. What does that mean? Now the Act is in operation, and it repealed the Non-Government Organizations Coordination Act of 1990. Repealing meaning it removed that act. So that act is no longer relevant in Kenya. So what is important now is the Public Benefits Organizations Act. Now, why did we have this act, the PBO Act? It introduced a framework for registration and regulation of public benefit entities. And these are the ones we call NGOs, or non-government organizations. Sometimes I think the term NGO is not very accurate, because there are very many non-government organizations which are not falling under this, like international organizations are non-government organizations. If in the strictest sense, if you think about international organizations like even United Nations, but not-for-profit organization is probably a more accurate term, but again, it's just something based on individual preference. So it created a legal environment, a legal and operationalization environment. And of course, promotion of accountability, transparency in operations of PBOs. Now, it's good that I also mention a bit of background here, that there are very many acts or many pieces of legislation, many pieces of law that non-governmental organizations are registered under, or organizations that are not-for-profit organizations. They fall under very many different types of laws. So probably that accountability was coming in place because of that. Maybe that was the intention of the government, so that the diverse laws could be put together in terms of NGOs. Not that those other laws are being repealed, not that it's only the Non-Governmental Organizations Coordinations Act of 1990 that was repealed. And of course, it also established a regulatory framework, mainly through a PBO regulatory authority. It's called the Public Benefits Organizations Regulatory Authority. That act created that regulator. And that is the equivalent of, it's called the NGO, it's called NGO board. I can't remember what term we were using, the complete term, but it was there as a regulator for NGOs, but that was only handling the not-for-profit organizations that had been registered under the Non-Governmental Organization Coordinations Act. It also created National Federation of PBOs, which is like an industry association for all organizations that are to be registered as public benefit organizations, and also created a tribunal to settle disputes. Let's look at the act itself. We'll be sharing these slides. It's also good that I mentioned that, and probably some of the wordings you'll find there based on what is projected may be very worded. So excuse us for that. When preparing the slides, we have it in mind that we'll also be sharing these slides. Therefore, you may want to read more and probably be able to understand it in your own time, so that it can benefit you. First, what is a PBO? Based on the Act, what the Act says. A PBO is a voluntary membership or non-membership, non-partisan, non-profit organization. And it is operated either locally or internationally. And it engages in public benefit activities and is registered. That means it will be a PBO if it has been registered by the new body that I've mentioned has been created, Public Benefits Organizations Regulatory Authority. That means if you are a PBO and you are not registered legally, then you'll not be recognized as a PBO. And of course, if it is engaging in public benefit activities, it's important to understand what are these public benefit activities. And again, the Act defines that an activity supports, promotes public benefits by enhancing or promoting the economic, environmental, social, cultural. It's quite a diverse thing. It's basically what NGOs do in a nutshell, if you can put it that way, what we know NGOs do. And the emphasis here is on public benefit. That means the public is benefiting. It's kind of contrast to a private benefit. What you can do privately in your company, in your organization, in your private life, and all that. So it is an activity that benefits the public. And of course, it will go to a category of it, either the general public, category of individuals, organizations. That means you can target a certain group, but of course, that group is public. The Act also goes ahead to spell out clearly what does not become a PBO, or what is not a PBO. It has that long list: trade unions, public bodies, political parties, religious organizations, societies, circles. So I know there are organizations, for example, if you look at those lists, like say societies, there are NGOs that are currently operating as societies. So if that NGO does not register under PBO, then by implication, it is not a PBO. It remains a society. And of course, likewise for all the other bodies listed there. Now, there's an important mention of the Act that no organization that is registered under any other law shall be registered under this Act while its registration under that other law subsists. That means if you are registered as a society, that's under Societies Act, which is a completely different piece of legislation. And then you register under the PBO Act. Then your registration in the Societies Act lapses, or it's no longer valid. So you become a PBO. And that's very clearly spelled out in the Act. And I believe that was kind of an avenue to bring together kind of conveniently for NGOs that are registered differently. They could be registered under Societies Act. There are others which were registered and or currently are registered under the Companies Act, for example. Most of them as companies limited by guarantee. I know of some of our clients who are registered as companies limited by guarantee societies and what we call CBOs, community-based organizations. Some under trusts. It's a Trust Act. I can't remember the full name, but it's basically a Trust Act, which is a node act. All those are different pieces of legislation that were kind of open to NGOs. So that will mean you transfer your legislation. You transfer your organization. If you are currently running an NGO that's registered under Companies Act or whatever, then the moment you seek registration under the PBO Act, it follows that you have now transferred yourself as an organization to regulation under the new Act. Now, there is also another avenue where the PBO regulatory authority will, the Act uses the word bestow. It will bestow the an organization to a status of PBO. And I think this is basically targeting the international NGOs. If there is an international NGO that's operating in Kenya, it is probably based on some international treaty agreed, or it is operating in a different country. Then it can seek that status of a PBO from the PBO regulatory authority. Now, for a PBO to benefit, and this is where it gets interesting, for a PBO to benefit from the benefits which are listed in the Act, then it is said that it must be registered as a PBO. That means you cannot enjoy the benefits of an NGO or a not-for-profit organization if you decide to remain as a society or a company limited by guarantee, a CBO, if you are not within the umbrella of the PBO Act. And as I said, of course, you effectively transfer yourself if you decide to seek registration under the new PBO Act. And I'm using the word new because, as I said, operationalization happened in May 2024. Now, the registration of PBOs, there'll be a transition period, and we are still in the transition period because after the operationalization in May, all NGOs were given up to May 2025. That means 12 months. So within a year from the commencement date, all NGOs are expected to have transferred to PBOs for them to remain as public benefit organizations. There are some NGOs that were exempted from registration under the old Act. And again, for them, they are supposed to come under this Act. So they were also given, they were also required to register within 3 months. And of course, those 3 months have lapsed. That is, if you take the commencement date in May, I think it was May 20, May 20, was it 26? I think it was 26th May. So if you add 3 months, then we are talking of June, July, August. So those ones have lapsed. So if one has not registered, probably there's a time to ensure that you expedite that process. Every NGO that had been registered under the repeal law shall be deemed to be registered as a PBO. Now, the old law is the NGO Coordination Act, the organizations that were registered as NGOs. Meaning now they're supposed to be registered automatically as PBOs. And of course, this automatic, probably automatic is not the right word, because there are requirements, and those requirements, then that body will, every NGO will need to meet those requirements. And we'll be discussing about those requirements. We'll be discussing those requirements later. And international NGOs are also required to register. the PBO regulatory authority for them to operate in Kenya. And of course, if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense here, because the government would want to know which is this NGO that has come into Kenya and is doing some activities. So you cannot just come through with an NGO from anywhere and you are in Kenya and you're operating and the government is not aware. I mean, every jurisdiction, everywhere in the world, no country would want to allow that. Because there are some NGOs that may not have the right motive. Therefore, there'll be those who will argue that this is a way of trying to kind of overregulate or control those who are not pro-government. What are the requirements for registration? The registration as a PBO. The organization itself, the PBO, will require a constitution. And the constitution is basically the instrument that determines how that PBO is to be governed. And the act itself gives some guidelines on what should be contained in the objectives of, and I'll be mentioning that. Then it also needs to have the founder's name, address, physical and postal address, description of the public benefit activities or what it's doing, the prescribed fee. Of course, the regulator will be getting the income through this regulatory process. That's basically how most government bodies are designed. If you are a regulator, the industry that you are regulating, then you will charge fees, and out of the fees, the regulator will be able to get the resources to run its affairs. And the PBO regulatory authority has been given quite some powers, and of course, any regulator will have powers to be able to manage or to regulate an industry. So it can come up with additional information. And one of the ways of getting the information, there is a provision in the Act that the minister, in this case, the minister in charge of the National Treasury, can come up with additional regulations, That means those regulations can be created, and in addition to what is already provided for in the Act, then the minister is empowered to come up with additional regulations. And of course, these are restricted within the Act. That means it's not just an open book. And the minister will come up with those regulations with consultation with the PBO regulatory authority to come up with ways of better regulating the industry. The principles and aspirations of PBOs is spelled out, and this is where now the PBO itself should be able to think in terms of its activities. As you can expect, the government will want to restrict PBOs to a certain activities because the government itself is structured in certain ways. It has its own organs, it has its own very many departments, very many offices which are doing many things. So these PBOs are supposed to complement government efforts in whatever it is doing. So the principles include commitment to the sanctity of human life. That means as an NGO or as a PBO, you'll not just be doing things that would be against the issue of human life. And that is huge, that's huge. Something that will, I mean, you can have all manner of things that can be discussed along those lines. promotion of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law and good governance. That's very principle. That's very important in our country. Is provided for in our constitution. The issue of respect for equality, rights, and dignity of all people. Again, this is something that's in our constitution. The promotion of social justice to enhance balanced economic development. Of course, here now is an issue of balancing so that you don't have favor certain areas or favor kind of give disadvantage to others. And there are many other areas, other things that are spelled out in the Act. These are just a few. And they are also required to disclose their objectives. And this is where in coming up with a constitution, the PBOs will be expected to show clearly what they are intending to do. So promotion of public benefit will be through enhancing or promoting economic, environmental, social, cultural development. And as I say, these are typical of what NGOs do, protecting the environment, advocacy on issues of general public interest, enhancing interest or well-being of the general public or a certain group of individuals. Probably the NGO is targeting women, youth. You know, those are the categories of individuals. What is the effect of registration as a PBO? What does it mean once you are registered as a PBO? The moment you're registered as a PBO, there is a conclusive authority to operate throughout Kenya, as specified in your constitution as a PBO, and in the certificate of registration, because you'll be awarded a certificate of registration once you are registered by the PBO regulatory authority. And of course, be a body corporate with a perpetual succession. This is common for entities. It basically means it has been created as an artificial person. That's what traditionally is done. If just like a company has been registered, it's a company, perpetual succession. Perpetual succession meaning it's there in existence, irrespective of those people who created it. And is capable of suing or be sued. Again, these are familiar terms which are common in incorporation or in registration of entities. And of course, it is also empowered now. It can be able to buy property. It can be able to hold movable property, can enter into contracts, and we can be able to do many things, open a bank account. It means it's an entity in itself. And that may not be new in itself. It's not a big issue, but it is important legally in that entity now is created. It's no longer an entity that is tied to the founders or the people who have started it. It's the separation of the person, the natural person who started it, and the PBO. The Act also wants PBOs to establish democratic, accountable management structures and implement internal accounting administrative procedures. This is important. Corporate governance. We are aware that many NGOs or many PBOs have been registered just purposely for the sake of fundraising for their founders or whoever started. Somebody starts an NGO or starts now a PBO, just to be seen in public, and you try to show like you are really doing some important things. But when you go deeper into it, you realize that that body was created just for the benefit of a person. So corporate governance becomes important, or governance generally for the PBOs, and democratic, meaning if it is involving several people, those people are involved in decision making, like voting for their leaders, voting for their directors, and then implement internal accounting and administrative procedures. Accounting becomes very important here because the PBOs will be fundraising, they'll be raising resources, they'll be receiving donations, grants, whatever forms of revenue they are able to raise. Then they need to be managed properly. And we'll be seeing later that the regulator will be very keen here, because annual reports will be given to the regulator, the PBO regulatory authority. And the aim is to ensure transparent and proper use of financial and other resources. What are the rights and privileges of PBOs? Rights and responsibilities: freedom of association, self-regulation, and the right to cooperate with the government and private entities. They must avoid political bias and report their activities transparently. Now, we all know about NGOs, the role NGOs have played in Kenya in the democracy, in advocacy, sometimes even extended to the political spheres. And this act has limited PBOs not to be biased against political individuals. You know, a politician, you are not against a politician, because it's supposed to be a public benefit. The freedom of association and self-regulation is given by what is called the National Federation of PBOs, which is also a body which has been created by this act. And the PBOs that are registered will have the freedom to associate with their fellow PBOs. And I believe here going forward will be a very important body here, because this is a body that has been created to kind of bring all PBOs together. It is empowered to issue self-regulation rules. It is also empowered to kind of negotiate on behalf of PBOs, advise the government on, or through the authority. So the PBOs that may be outside the umbrella body may not have a say. And of course, the issue of political bias is also important. If you remember the issue, the discussion that was there during the Gen Z, the so-called Gen Z demonstrations, where an international NGO, I think it was Ford Foundation, which was accused of a bias, financing the protests. Probably the PBO, with the PBO Act, now such an NGO can be put to task to explain whether it's politically biased. Of course, this is something we'll see develop over time, because now after the 12-month window of transition, then the regulator will kind of be having the mandate now to apply in full swing, and can be able to determine who is registered, who is not, because the regulator will maintain a register of all PBOs and can deregister even a PBO can deregister. That means your license has been cancelled. So those are interesting scenarios, and which we will kind of see how they unfold with the time, especially after the transition period. Now, there are some benefits which will accrue to PBOs, and this is interesting because, as I mentioned, if an NGO, and I'm using the word NGO in the old sense, an NGO registered as a society, as a CBO, as a company limited by guarantee, or a trust, if it does not register as a PBO, then it's not expected to benefit. It's not expected to benefit from the benefits which are listed in the PBO Act. And those benefits are listed in the second schedule of the Act. And it's quite a long list. Exemptions from income tax, received from membership subscriptions, and any donations or grants. Income tax on income acquired from the active conduct of income producing activities, because a PBO is allowed now to engage in income producing activities. And of course, the resources that it generates from those income producing activities then are also expected to be applied for the public benefit purposes. Tax on interest and dividends on investments and gains and on assets, or the sale of assets. This is quite a good one, and it's good to mention that since these benefits are now being listed here, previously when an exemption was granted by KRA under the Income Tax Act, that exemption was mainly for income tax. That means an NGO that was receiving donations and has been granted the exemption, if it invested, let's say, for example, in treasury bonds, where it earned interest, which is called investment income, or invested in a bank or wherever, then that income was not exempted from income tax. It was a different category of income. So the certificate that was given, it was only for the main income, like donations or whatever revenues there. But if you get to investments, then it was not. But this one is going further to exempt interest, dividends, and even gains. If you know about gains now, like in capital gains, if, for example, you buy a property and gain and you sell, there is a gain, difference between what the price you buy at and the price you sell at. Also exempted is stamp duty and court fees, tax incentives for donations and contributors, access to government, that's another benefit, access to government financing through budget subsidies, specific purpose grants, work contracts for PBOs partnering with the government, eligibility of membership of the National Federation of PBOs. Now, this is a benefit. That means a PBO that has been registered is eligible for membership to of the National Federation of PBOs. The one I said has been created by this act, and it is now the umbrella body for the industry. It's an industry association for PBOs to come together, and I'm assuming this will be a very important body for advocacy, kind of for the industry as a whole, so that it can maybe try to sell their policies to the government, try to negotiate with the government on certain issues that would be favoring the industry, or areas that they believe may not be favorable could be removed. There will also be preferential consideration in public procurement processes. That one is very, very interesting, because it means a PBO can bid to do something to the government, and there will be preferential consideration. And then opportunity to participate in training programs provided by government institutions. And even the regulator is, in the act, the regulator, the PBO regulatory authority, has been given the responsibility of training the PBOs. Now, the act itself has not really given how all these benefits will really, the details of exactly what it means. If, for example, you say tax incentives for donations, which are these tax incentives? How are you going to be to get these incentives? And I believe this is probably something that will be clarified through the regulations that I mentioned. And it's also possible that the government can also amend some of these sections, or either to give clarity, or even change to give direction. So it will be very interesting to see how these benefits will be taken up, how a PBO will be able to get these benefits. But as it stands now, especially on the taxes, it looks like this automatic. It looks like this automatic. So if, for example, exemptions from, these ones look like they're automatic. And when I was comparing the income tax regulations on tax exemptions and these details, I was thinking there could be a conflict, and I'll be happy to hear, especially if there are lawyers in the house. I'm not a lawyer myself, so I'm just interpreting as a layman, or with the little law that I have done or have understood. There'll be, it looks like there'll be, here we are dealing with the two different pieces of legislation. Income Tax Act, which is the principal kind of tax, the Tax Act, the act on taxes that guides on taxation, and which is implemented by the tax administrator, which is the Kenya Revenue Authority in Kenya. Then there is a PBO Act, which has also mentioned tax benefits. I was wondering which is more important, which one is more kind of, which one has a higher muscle as far as taxes are concerned. Because naturally I would expect the Income Tax Act to have the higher muscle. But then here we have the PBO Act, which is kind of very explicit on the benefits. I will not be surprised if going forward, or through like finance bill, the annual finance bills, such things are clarified, or even through the regulations. Every registered PBO will also expect to will be expected to comply with certain requirements. Every year, within 6 months of the end of each financial year, the PBO will be expected to provide a statement of its accounts audited. A certified copy of its financial statements, and then a report dealing with the program of activities of the PBO during the financial year. Now, this will be given to the PBO regulatory authority. This will be like an annual returns. And this is not different from what was happening in the NGO Coordination Act, or 1990 Act, because NGOs were required to do that. But remember, there are some NGOs which were not under that act. As I said at the beginning, societies, companies limited by guarantee and all that. So for them, they were not required to file returns to the NGO Coordination Board. Their returns were elsewhere, in their respective acts, they were required to. But now, even a report on what they have been doing. What have you been doing? And of course, remember, as a PBO, what you are doing based on your constitution, the purpose for which you are created. And here then, the regulator is looking at the resources you have based on your financial statements. You have received this much, you have received these millions, you have spent them in these activities. So you need to give those details. And the regulator will be empowered, or is already empowered by the Act to come up and ask questions, seek clarification, can make inquiries. And this PBO regulatory authority, the PBO RA, has been empowered to, quite heavily, if I may put it that way, to register and deregister PBOs. This PBO is not complying with the Act, so it's removed from the register of PBOs. Maintain a register, interpret national policy on PBOs. The government will have a national policy, the government has directed this. Then it will guide, the regulator will guide the PBOs on what that means in terms of the operations. Of course, receive and review annual reports from PBOs, the ones that are required to submit within 6 months of the financial year end. It's also the one to advise the government on activities of PBOs, and they are all in development. So it's also an advisor to the government. And advice in law, when you say advising, it carries with it a huge weight, if you are aware of that. Advice is if you remember, there was a case one time when the Supreme Court was to make a decision. I think it was about the salaries and the Remuneration Commission, which is a constitutional organ created in the Constitution. And it advises the government on salaries and remuneration for public officers. And I think, for public officers. And I remember the court was to decide at one point whether the government can ignore the advice. And the court ruled no, the government cannot ignore that advice. So it tells you the weight of what advice means in the government world, because if you ignore the advice, then you must be able to show on what basis did you make the decision. Because if legally this is the body that is mandated or it has the powers to advise, then automatically if you ignore, then you'll have to show how or to say how did you arrive at that decision, or what basis did you make the decision. It's also to issue forms, instructions, and model documents. That means it will be able to guide this basically administrative matters, and probably kind of empowering the PBOs or streamlining operations to guide the PBOs, facilitate interaction with the PBOs and government at the work of the regulator, institute inquiries to determine PBO compliances or compliance with the law. Has a PBO been compliant? So the regulator can be able to ask, the regulator can be able to ask the PBO whether they are complying with the law and making specific inquiries. And this is where maybe it can lead now to deregistration if the PBO is not acting right. And of course, it can also train and advise PBOs. We also to discuss the issues of new charitable organizations tax rules, and what I have covered mainly so far is about PBOs, and I suggest that we have questions in our chat so that we can also be addressing those questions as we continue in the webinar. We can also have room to discuss them. And as I said, I also have a team within the webinar. So if you have a question that you think is of interest, and that question can be checked before, sometimes it's good to ask a question in advance so that the team can be able to check, for example, a specific provision of the Act, or some clarification that, in terms of wordings. So feel free to put it before we get to our Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. So you can be putting those questions, those comments in the chat. Good. Let's look at this charitable organizations. New charitable organizations tax rules. These were gazetted in May 2024. The same month that the PBO Act was operationalized. The PBO, I think it was operationalized on 14th March, and the tax rules were operationalized, they were gazetted on 26th March. I remember the National Treasury had given this draft for discussion. Nowadays, of course, in our country, when you want to put in a piece of law, you have to put it out for public participation, which is something we should be very proud of as a country. It's something that is good, so that we don't have a government just waking up and one morning bringing up a new law which may not be doing well, or it may not be very well intended for, or it may not serve people well. Now, this it is good to just give the background a bit so that we also understand. The Income Tax Act, which I've said is a big, it's a node and big piece of legislation. It's like the main tax law, if I may call it that. Is a chapter in our laws. I think it's chapter 470. And it is amended every other time. And almost all finance bills, probably all, will always touch on an amendment of the Income Tax Act. So as old as it is, you can say it has been updated over time, over the years. And within the Income Tax Act, the minister in charge of finance with the CS Treasury is empowered to issue regulations, certain regulations. It's empowered to issue certain regulations. And the regulations are like what you call, actually the regulations are kind of smaller laws, subsidiary legislation, they call it in law. Meaning it is guided by the main law, the main act, and then with that guidance, the minister then creates the rules. So there are some old rules, the old regulations, which are dated back 2007. And with the new rules, those ones were revoked, meaning they are no longer applicable. And the purpose was to provide clarity on the criteria for exemption, for tax exemption. What is the criteria? When do we tell somebody has somebody has qualified for tax exemption or has not? Now, what is the relationship between these rules and the PBO Act that I've just been talking about? Let's remember that these are under two different acts. The main act for these rules is the Income Tax Act. This is the mother act. But the PBO Act talks of tax exemptions. As I said, is one of the benefits which are listed under the second schedule of the PBO Act. So I will not be surprised if exemptions here under these rules going forward only apply to PBOs. I will not be surprised. Then this is something for the future. Probably it can come with a finance bill or an amendment or some change somewhere, but I'll not be surprised because that looks like the intention here, to ensure that for you to be exempted, you must be a PBO. Because the PBO Act is already saying very clearly that an organization that's not registered as a PBO will not enjoy the benefits of PBOs. Now, let's look at these rules. For exemptions, a charitable organization, note that the charitable organization, this is a term that is being applied in the Income Tax Act. The PBO Act does not talk of charitable organization, it talks of PBO. But if you are to make an amendment somewhere in the income tax and say charitable organization means a PBO Act, according to the, a charitable organization means a PBO as defined in the Public Benefits Organizations Act. then automatically it follows that these rules are guided by what the PBO benefits list gives. And sometimes the language is also good to appreciate the language. The word charity is used mainly for the British language. Like in the UK, I think they have the main charity law, which has created the equivalent of our PBOs. It's also very strong. So when you talk of charity, and considering that the Income Tax Act is an old piece of legislation in Kenya, I think it is from the pre-independence days or early in our independence. I can't remember exactly when it was put in. You can kind of see why the word charity can be in the Income Tax Act. But it talks of relief for poverty, distress of the public, advancement of religion, or advancement of education. Now, these are not really new because they were kind of still there in the 2007 regulations. General criteria for tax exemption. Then the charitable organization, the income of that charitable organization. And as I said, probably charitable organization, you can read it as a PBO, must be expended in Kenya. That means it's raising money and it is spending in Kenya. For you to be exempted, the benefit is accruing to the residents of Kenya. And of course, that is rational. Why should we exempt one that is not benefiting us as a country? The eligible organization must have been established, operated exclusively for one or more of the charitable purposes. And of course, those purposes are the ones that have said, relief of poverty, distress, or distress of the public, advancement of religion, advancement of education. And then a charitable organization may accumulate surplus funds, but it must apply any surplus exceeding an average of 15% of its funds over 3 consecutive years to its charitable purposes. It must apply any surplus exceeding an average of 15%. Now, this is very specific and interesting because it is basically saying for you to be exempted, if you have surplus funds is basically profit. You can call it profit, but we usually apply the word profit for a private entity, which is a profit-making organization. So surplus funds means out of the gross, everything that you received, and if you remove the expenses, that's a surplus. And it will be positive or negative, depending. If you spent more than you received, then it's a negative or a deficit. It must exceed on average of 15% of its funds. That means you are doing whatever profits or whatever surplus you are getting, you are applying it for public benefit. You are not just continuing to make surplus and probably applying it for administrative purposes. Now, if we can just look at each of these purposes individually, like the relief of poverty. And excuse my slide for being too wordy. And as I said, we make it wordy because we are also assuming that because we are going to share these slides, they'll help you for reference or when you are reading, and you can be able to read content that you can be able to understand on your own. So if you are to be exempted, and because you you are targeting, your role is basically to relieve the public from poverty. Then you must be organized and operated solely for the relief of poverty. And what is this relief of poverty? Like training, support, assistance to improve capacity, to manage agricultural resources, land use, such things. You should also provide community development for poor and needy persons, like community-based projects, relating to self-help, empowerment, capacity building, skills development, which basically are the public benefits we were seeing in the PBO Act. Then provide training and education, healthcare, and other support to enable poor generate sustainable income and be self-sufficient. Beneficiaries are restricted to persons experiencing poverty. You are to give benefits, or you are trying to relieve people from poverty. Then it also means that those resources are only accruing to the poor. They are not going to the rich. And of course, this sometimes is also open to interpretation, because if you think about what's the difference between a poor man and a rich man, that's everybody will have their own criteria. But of course, ultimately, the KRA that will check on your application for exemption and decide whether whether that is applying to or is restricted to the people experiencing poverty. So you must be able to have a criteria which is defining you as an applicant for exemption. Then you need to have a criteria to which you are basically showing how you define the beneficiaries and how you select those who are to benefit, to receive the benefits. And of course, based on the criteria you have established, then the government will also determine whether it makes sense or not. Then if you are focusing on religion, then you'll be expected to be operating exclusively for purposes of advancement of religion. What is religion? It may be seeking new followers and adherents through proselytizing. That difficult word just means preaching. For you are seeking followers. You are seeking people, adherents through preaching or spreading your message, encouraging and facilitating the practice of the religion by existing followers or adherents through the provision of places of worship. Maybe you are constructing churches, you are constructing mosques, temples, whatever, depending on the faith that you adhere to. Raising awareness and understanding of religious beliefs and practices, missionary and outreach work, is basically targeting religious bodies. And it is assumed that this is a public benefit. Exemption for charities or charitable organizations targeting advancement of education. So here for education, it will be interesting because we know education is regulated by the Ministry of Education, and there are different acts that govern different institutions under the education sector. For example, Universities Act, TVET, basic education for primary schools. So if if you have started a school and you want to be exempted as an organization, you have started a school and you want to be exempted. So you will also be expected to meet the requirements of the Ministry of Education or the act that defines basic, that gives about guides on basic education. So here you will need to familiarize yourself with the relevant piece of legislation that guides on that. Remember, if you are registered as a PBO, and let's assume you call yourself, if I start one today and I call it Danchege Primary School, and is a PBO, and I'm assuming I'm giving a public benefit, it does not automatically become a school, in my understanding, because it requires the licensing by the Ministry of Education. So that one, it calls for ensuring that you comply with the basics of what the Ministry of Education wants, how a school should be in terms of the teachers, how you should be able to, the curriculum, how you should treat the children, a lot that goes into a school. I think this week there was a report about some schools will be deregistered because they are not meeting the requirements. So I will not expect that a PBO, a public benefit organization, has been registered and therefore meets the requirements of the PBO Act and is operating a school or a TVET or a university without meeting the requirements of that other act, because that other act is what is licensing that as a school, as a TVET, as, like that. So for basic education, the rules, provision of basic education, early childhood, we know early childhood education, that's a devolved role, is regulated by the counties. That is pre-primary education is devolved to the counties. That's in our constitution. And then the education, primary education and TVET and universities, that's under the guidance of the national government. So you can get exemption here if you are starting a university, you are starting a TVET, or you are providing training facilities for persons living with disability as approved by the relevant government agency. Government agency in this case could be the ministry, probably guided by, I know there is a body called, I've forgotten, but it's persons living with physical disability. I can't remember, but I know it's a very important body as far as advising the government on who qualifies to be termed as physically disabled. Then provision of school buildings, libraries, or equipment for education institutions, provision of school textbooks, quite a number of things that can make one or a PBO to be exempted. If we are talking of distress of the public, and distress is basically when there are problems in the society, then it also means you need to be exclusively organized and operated for the relief of distress. And distress, we talk of disaster relief like floods, landslides, earthquakes, people who are suffering. or during conflict, like refugees, or even human wildlife conflict nowadays is also a big issue because the population is growing and there'll be pressure to conserve the environment. People sometimes kill animals. And it's a big debate again on who is more important. Is it the human being or the animal? But then again, you have to consider that even in our constitution, we have provided that we are just stewards. We are just holding on the environment for future generations. Because if we just look at it from our current generation, then we might wipe out all the animals and like do grazing and construct estates in national parks without regard to future generations. So since we are just custodians, we are just holding in for future generations, it's also good to have now that mind. Rehabilitation, care, counseling of addicted persons, like drugs, the dependence forming substances, and the education programs, assistance for the elderly, persons living with disability. That's what basically distress means for if one is to seek exemption. Now, as we approach to wind up, managing risks associated with the transition for the PBO. And this is where we advise our clients to really prioritize these issues. We are in November, we are towards the end of the year, and May is coming. So the top decision makers in those PBOs, they need to think about the issue of legislation, the issue of transition, people usually rush in the last minute. And you can be sure that there'll be matters that can be teething problems. There can be matters that can be teething problems when the new act comes into place. And you usually find in our culture, until something has caught the attention of the social media, the newspapers, TV, it does not become a problem for everybody. But it might be a problem for you as an individual or as management of a particular organization. So you need to prioritize and plan. Familiarize yourself with the tax exemption rules, eligibility criteria, so that you prepare to comply. You prepare to have a way of compliance to ensure that you are compliant, and therefore you are eligible, even when you are to seek exemption, to apply for exemption. Good to engage with professionals. If the areas that you need clarification, the areas that are not very clear to you, it's good to talk to us. Talk to us, tax, accounting professionals, so that we can guide you. You may want to involve lawyers. I know there are organizations that are being run by lawyers, and probably they have an advantage in terms of understanding of the law, but they might require also guidance in terms of tax and accounting. Remember that when the law has been created, the law is basically expected to be complied with by everybody who is affected by that law. And of course, participate in workshop webinars like these ones. Know what, try to learn. Participate in advocacy or stakeholder engagements. And of course, for PBOs, if you follow what I mentioned earlier, then it is good that once you are a member of the PBO and the National Federation of PBOs as an organization is formed, then your active participation in those forums in that organization. Even kind of getting in to know how has it been formed, who are the officials, where does it, because remember, this is a body that is guided by law, because how it is to be formed, the board, who qualifies, try to get involved so that you can be able to benefit and be able to kind of prevent any additional, any problems that can distract you from your focus on your work. So in conclusion, understand the PBO Act. Nowadays, it's easy to get the Act itself. Just go Google in the internet. You don't have to go to visit the government press. Previously, we used to go to the bookshop of the government press somewhere along Haile Selassie Avenue. Nowadays, you can just Google it and you get it from the relevant websites. These regulations offer opportunities and they present challenges. There'll be teething problems, as I've said. There might be kind of political push and pull. There could be amendments that are coming, like now what I've just talked about, possible harmonization of the tax exemption rules and the PBO Act. So if those harmonizations come, they may be coming to ensure that you cannot get tax exemption unless you are a PBO under the PBO Act. That's my personal view. I'm not saying this is an official government policy. I've not seen it anywhere. Probably somebody may have seen some such a thing somewhere else. Can also tell us. Stay informed, adapt to changes, accept the changes, so that this act, we understand, will be able to separate those who are genuine, those who are not genuine, and be able to streamline the industry so that we have one uniform law that is guiding the not-for-profit organizations, the public benefit organizations. So with that, I appreciate you listening, and I will take it back to Frida to guide us further. I don't know whether there are any questions in the chat or whether people can also ask questions. Frida, if you are there, you can take it up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan, for the wonderful presentation. It was quite informative. It is important for other NGOs or the PBOs present to take time and understand the Act, and also to be able to adapt to the changes that have been put in place, and also seek the legal guidance and financial guidance to maintain compliance, because compliance is very necessary. And that's where, as a firm, we come in. And now we have come to a very important part of the presentation where we get to ask our questions. So if you have any question, please feel free to unmute, raise your hand, then unmute and ask the question. You can also utilize the chat section area and we will be able to respond to the questions. Or if you have an additional point that you feel is important for the people present, you can also unmute. I can see a comment from Jao. He's saying this is very good. Thank you, Jao. Beda Owino is saying that she just joined. Sorry about that, Beda. I'll share the presentation slides later in the day. Since we don't have any questions, the presentation was very clear. Thank you, Dan, for taking time in presenting to us. I would request you to give your parting shot, then I can take it up from there.
Thank you, Frida. I'm surprised there are no questions. As a trainer, I expect questions. I don't know how to push people to ask questions, or I don't know whether, because we usually say people have not understood or they have understood 100%. I can only assume it's 100%, although 100% is usually very rare, but well and good. Mine is just to appreciate the participants. Even after this, if you feel there is some information you need clarified, you can probably just give us a call. I'll put my number there. Also our email address, so that in case there is an area of interaction you think is important for us to, just to give guidance and probably discuss more. You can also help us to build capacity. Probably you are a lawyer and there is a new update that has come up and we may not be familiar with it. We really appreciate. So thank you. Thank you also the John Daniel Partners team, Frida, Mercy, Beatrice, John, those who are been involved in preparing the content for the webinar. As I said, we are not lawyers, we are a CPA firm, and therefore we just look at the piece of legislation as, just there as it is. And based on our understanding of tax, that's how we are able to guide you on the relevant, those tax exemption rules. So thank you very much. It has been a pleasure. It has been an honor for me to facilitate the webinar. I look forward to more interactions with you and build capacity to grow, build capacity to grow others, and we all grow together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. At this juncture, I take this opportunity to appreciate you all for your time. Thank you for joining, and hopefully the session was informative to you and your businesses or organizations that you run. We normally have these webinars every other month, so look out for our next webinar in December. But before that, we have a tax breakfast. It's happening on 11th December. The venue is Ngongil's Hotel and charges are 4,000 shillings. I shared the information and the registration link in the chat section. Maybe I can reshare the information again. We are looking forward to having you. You can recommend or send your accountants or even the representatives from your organizations to attend this breakfast. It will be very significant for your businesses or SMEs. We are going to handle recent tax changes and their implications on SMEs. So it's a very relevant topic for various businesses. So feel free to contact us and register for the same. It's important to note that we have very limited slots. So book your slot by end of this month. So it's in 3 days time, you're supposed to have booked yourself a slot to get to come and learn. Yes. Maybe I can invite Mercy to give an additional comment on the same and invite you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Frida, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I've been following the presentation from Dan, and I believe we are going to put in practice what we've learned today in our organization. It was quite a good presentation. Thank you everyone for joining. I am encouraging us to register for the tax breakfast that is coming next month on 11th. It's a good opportunity for us to network as business people and also learn on the changes that are happening on our tax area in Kenya and also plan for next year. So I am happy that we attended this webinar. Look forward for the next webinar. I want to promise you that it's going to be good. It is going to be impactful to you as a business owner. Yeah, so I do not have much to say. I want to thank you all again and release everyone. You can be leaving at your own time. Yes, the presentation is going to be shared to your email and also the recording. Yes, so thank you so much, everyone.
This is brought to you by John Daniel and Partners LLP.